Mac, the camouflage, assassin, representing on Fat and all of that. You know me. You don't know and recognize this face. Look, you see that face? Y'all gonna have a whole lot of this coming at you in just a second.
In the vibrant world of hip-hop, the stories of artists often transcend the music they create, revealing profound truths about society, resilience, and the pursuit of justice. One such artist who embodied this spirit was Mac, a gifted rapper hailing from New Orleans. Unfortunately, he became a symbol of unimaginable injustice when he was wrongfully convicted of a murder he did not commit. McKinley Phipps Jr., better known as Mac, was born on July 30th, 1977, in New Orleans, Louisiana. He grew up in Uptown, just 3 blocks from the Magnolia Projects. He and his siblings would often spend time at their grandmother's residence, him being the oldest out of 6. Nicknamed Mac, just like his father, a Vietnam War veteran, Phipps had a warm childhood. Our parents always showed us love. We didn't have much growing up, but we had love. Growing up in a rough neighborhood, McKinley was exposed to drug dealing from a young age, but thankfully never saw it as a way out. Instead, he was fascinated by the music and watched music videos in which rappers at the time were showing off their expensive cars and jewelry. While most of them didn't own the things that they were boasting about, it served Mac as an example of what success should look like. At the age of 7, he began to write music and some of his first rhymes. Luckily, his uncle Bean, who was a diehard hip-hop fan and sort of like a big brother whom Mac looked up to, saw a lot of potential in him. They would listen to music together, and he would also help to shape a lot of Mac's sound by introducing him to various artists. He was also the first person who Mac rapped to. Inspired by rappers like Rakim, Mac formed groups in his neighborhood, created routines, and entered talent shows. Uncle Bean knew 2 guys who were also into rap at the time, Gregory D and Sporty T. When Mac was 11, his uncle introduced them. Gregory listened to some of his music and said, "Man, if I ever get on, I got you." Well, luckily for him, Gregory D would indeed get on, and a year later, he would form a duo, together with a soon-to-be New Orleans legend, Mannie Fresh. He didn't forget his promise to the kid, and Mac, who was now 12, started to work with Mannie Fresh on his first album. He taught him how to make beats and showed him a lot of techniques on how to make a song. Before Mannie, Mac used to rap run-on songs, one long song with no structure. He explained to him that there should be verses and hooks and showed him what an overall song should look like. My approach to songwriting became a combination of metaphors and similes with a dab of storytelling. Before releasing anything, he also landed a deal with a Dallas-based record label called Leo Records. He knew about this label from Mannie and Gregory, who were both signed to it, and knew that one of the people who was running it also had a condo in New Orleans. He begged his parents to sign the deal since he was a minor, but it also came with additional conditions. His parents wanted him to still focus on school, so they offered him a deal. They will sign it if he promises to continue getting straight A's, but if they saw his grades go down, it's over. Driven by his passion, he accepted the deal and proceeded to work on his debut. While the deal was unpaid, the label put Mac in the studio. In 1990, at the age of 13, Mac, under the name Lil Mac, released his debut album, The Lyrical Midget. The album consisted of 12 songs, and they even made a music video for the song, I Need Wheels.
It's catching the bus every day, ain't gonna hack it, I'm tired of it, so daddy buy me a car, I got too many girlfriends that live too far.
While it didn't become an album that he's known for now, releasing an album back then, at the age of 13, is more than impressive. The album helped to solidify Mac's status as one of the city's talents. Throughout his teens, he continued to work on his music, alongside Mannie Fresh. In 1993, Mannie became an in-house producer for a record label, Cash Money Records, which made an opportunity for Mac to also work with its artists. In 1996, he appeared on BG's Chopper City album on a song called In Trouble.
I grabbed the tech and started bucking back, cause I'd rather take half the force out before they pump a slug in Mac.
The same year, he signed with Ionic Records and released a single called Mad or Jealous, featuring Storm.
Them niggas know you either mad or you jealous.
Man, them niggas mad.
Them niggas jealous.
Together with Storm, they were working on an album and were just about to release it, but unfortunately, problems inside the label pushed back the album, and soon, Mac was once again a free agent. While music was his passion, he had to make ends meet, and now a 20-year-old Mac had to make a decision on which label he should join. At the time, there were only 2 major labels from New Orleans, Cash Money and No Limit. After a lot of thinking, he joined No Limit and became a No Limit soldier. I chose No Limit because I felt like I was going to stand out more at No Limit with my style compared to other artists on the label. Plus, I knew everybody except Master P. You see, Mac was always a fan of more lyrical and complex songs because, as I mentioned, Rakim was his biggest influence. On No Limit, At the time, the music was more simplistic, as Mac calls it, and he understood if he joined Cash Money, he would become just a guy who had rhymes around more famous guys with rhymes. While in No Limit, his lyrical complexity would shine through, and he would stand out from the rest of the squad with his own style. Well, he couldn't have been more right. He joined No Limit in 1997, and it was the time when No Limit took off. No Limit was absolutely everywhere. The roster that included Snoop Dogg, cmurder, Mystical, Silk the Shocker, and Mia X was touring all over the country, making millions of dollars. Despite all of it, Mac was dying to release his debut album for No Limit and finally make some serious cash. Thankfully, in 1998, the world got to listen to his second studio album, called Shell Shock. It reached number 11 on the Billboard 200, peaking at number 4, going gold, and fully solidifying Mac's name, not only in New Orleans, but all around the world. The album showcased a little shift in the style that felt more in line with the label's street-influenced music, highlighting gun violence, drugs, and misogyny.
I hit that till it aches, and when she nuttin', she shakes. When niggas shot at me, she bust back. She carry big gats, her arm tatted, Big Mac.
His dreams of rap stardom in the bedroom mirror came to fruition as he performed for arena crowds of thousands of people. With the money, he was finally able to take care of his family and also treated himself right by buying a big house. Life was going perfectly. A year later, he released his third studio album. The album featured a lot of No Limit artists, and a music video for War Party was also released the same year.
World War. Feel the wrath of a nigga who busts his World War.
Despite the success of the singles, the album did significantly less well on the Billboard chart compared to his previous album. The album only peaked at number 44. Unfortunately, this album marked his last album release in years, and soon, chart performance was the least of his worries. By 2000, Mac had grown frustrated with his No Limit deal, disappointed by the performance of his last album. He wanted to get back to music he loved before he joined and launch his own label, with his family as his prime helpers. His mother was responsible for booking small shows in different little clubs around Louisiana, scouting for new and up-and-coming talents. On February 20th, 2000, his mother hosted an open mic at a place called Club Mercedes, near Baton Rouge. Mac had just come back from doing shows in Mississippi and was about to embark on the next tour. Weirdly enough, he didn't feel like coming to the event that night, being tired from all the touring, but he didn't want to disappoint his mother, so he still decided to go. Mac got into a car with his father and drove to the club. His mother was working at the door, while his father stayed inside, making sure things ran smoothly. Mac, his cousin, and his brother were all having fun at the club, listening to the music. At one point after midnight, when Mac was signing autographs and talking to two girls, he suddenly saw his cousin getting into a fight with some other guy at the club. One of the guys that Mac was with tried stepping in between to separate them and stop the shoving match. At this point, Mac decided to take a step towards it to see what was going on, when suddenly, he heard a gunshot. Initially, he didn't understand whether it was based from the music or a gunshot, but when he saw people running towards the exit, he immediately grabbed the lady that was standing near him and pulled her down to the ground, saying, "Don't run till you see where these shots are coming from." Then, he got up and grabbed his friend Russ, while his other friend named Daryl grabbed Mac from behind, shielding him from all sides, and they started to run towards the front door. Instinctively, Mac was looking for his mother, who was working at the front door collecting money, to make sure she was okay. As they were running towards the exit, Mac pulls out his gun, later commenting, "I didn't know who's the target of the shooting. I pulled it out just out of defense, since I didn't know where the shots are coming from and who's the target." They proceeded to run towards the door, with Mac holding his gun in the air, trying to prevent from bumping into somebody and gun going off from the impact. He got outside just to see his mother and most of his crew already in a car, waiting for him to leave the scene. He got into the car and went straight to home. His father stayed behind and saw 19-year-old Baron Victor Jr. on the ground, bleeding. A nursing student was tending to the wound. She told Phipps Sr. that he will be fine, so he left too, trailing behind Mac and the rest of the crew. As soon as Mac got home, one of his friends, who was house-sitting his two younger siblings, said that St. Tammany detectives called and they wanted to question him about the shooting. Only a couple of minutes later, Mac's house got surrounded by police officers, blocking down the streets. They went inside his house, and a couple of hours later, Mac was sitting in the interrogation room. Mac now knows that there was a shooting, and the gunshot that he heard was indeed fired from the gun, not from speakers, but yet he knows nothing about the aftermath. As he was sitting there, he couldn't stand still and wanted to leave the room as fast as he could. So, before he even had a lawyer present, he lied, telling detectives that he didn't have a gun on him. His main concern at the time was a concealed weapons charge, Murder never crossed his mind. Mind you, as far as he knows, he's being questioned about the shooting that took place and about some sort of assault. I was so confident that I was getting out of jail because I felt like whoever got shot was living. He was going to wake up and be able to tell them who shot him. So I figure I'm going home. Moments later, a third person enters the room, coming next to the detective and whispering something in his ear. Then, the person leaves the room, and the detective informs Mac that he is now facing a murder charge since the victim of the shooting has passed away. The bullet that hit 19-year-old Victor apparently also traveled into his chest and subsequently killed him. Mac's plan fell apart in seconds. He immediately confessed to having a gun at the scene, but claimed that he never discharged it. His new plan was to invite police back to his home so he could show them the gun. They'd see a bullet was never discharged, and it would prove his innocence. The police returned to Phipps' family home in Baton Rouge with Mac in handcuffs. He led them to his room, where they saw the gun that Mac had with him in the club, fully loaded and had not been discharged. While in Mac's reality, this should have proven his innocence, unfortunately, that wasn't enough for the police. They came up with the story that I must have had another weapon that I threw out the car. They teared through the house looking for the murder weapon, as his parents and siblings were all witnessing this madness. After digging through all the cabins, the police didn't manage to find the gun, but that didn't stop them from continuing to run with their story that there might have been another gun. While all of his siblings watched, Mac got walked out of his house in cuffs with his mother screaming that he was innocent. They confiscated Mac's gun and took his father's weapon collection, who as an ex-military man, collected vintage guns, which were never fired. The door closed behind Mac and the police. This would be the last time his family would see him outside of prison or a courtroom for a very, very long time. Mac's trial began only a year after the incident. Throughout this time, police tried to collect as much evidence as they could to link Mac to the February 21st shooting. They did gunshot residue tests on his hands and clothes that he was wearing that night, which all came back negative. They also ran residue tests on his gun, which also came back negative, meaning that the real murder weapon was never found. They had no evidence whatsoever to convict Mac of murder, except a few statements from some individuals alleging that Mac was the shooter. A jury for the trial was seated the same week as the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks in New York and Washington, D.C. The trial was held at the St. Tammany Parish Courthouse in Louisiana, and there was not a single African American in the jury. During the trial, the prosecution's plan was to paint him as bad as they could to the jury since they had absolutely no evidence. Throughout the trial, they kept referring to Mac as an assassin. While the timing for a term like that was horrible and at the same time strategically used by the prosecution, it was also taken completely out of context. At the time, Mac was also known as Camouflage Assassin, but it wasn't due to him killing people, but rather due to his lyrical complexity and ability to spit rhymes. The prosecution also used this music against him by creating a narrative that he was a murderer who was glorifying killing people. According to Mac, they took lyrics out of context from two different songs and spliced them up together to make a statement. One song was Murder Murder Kill Kill, which was like a straight battle rap. The other song was called Shell Shock, and the line that they referred to was actually a line about my father. They said, "This young man said, murder murder kill kill, if you f with me, I'll put a bullet in your brain." Then, they proceeded to show the guns confiscated from Mac's home to the jury, but what they had failed to mention was that all of the guns were his father's, except for one. When Mac's attorney asked prosecution to provide residue tests that they ran on Mac to show his innocence, they simply denied conducting any of those tests at all. On top of all of this, they had a couple of witnesses who testified on the stand that they indeed saw Mac with a gun running outside just after they heard the gunshot. Years later, all of those witnesses would come out with their stories, how they were allegedly threatened, intimidated, or even charged if they even hinted that they weren't willing to go along with the prosecution's case. For example, a woman by the name of Eula James testified during the court that she saw Mac fire the fatal shot, but would years later reveal that when they invited her for questioning, she was pregnant, and they started to intimidate her by saying, "You will have this baby behind bars," despite her never witnessing the shooting. Another example was Lionel Warren, who was a close friend of Mac. The same night of the shooting, he was stopped by the police, and they said he was charged with a murder, mistaking him with Mac. When they found out it wasn't him, they tried to pressure him to testify against Mac. When he said no, they charged him with obstruction of justice, and he was later sentenced to 1 year in jail. The only major witness for prosecution was Baron Victor's cousin, Nathaniel Tillison, who claimed that he was only a few feet away that fatal night. One of the journalists investigating this case years later commented on his statements by saying, "His story has a lot of holes in it. Initially it was, I saw a person with a black handgun shot my cousin, and then it was, Mac had a chrome handgun, he shot my cousin. He said he went running over there when his cousin was shot, and then in the next statement, he was holding his cousin, looking Mac dead in the eye when he shot him." So each time, his statement changed. There was also one witness whose testimony was never heard during the trial. A man by the name Jerry Price, who was also the victim's cousin, not only claimed that Mac didn't shoot the kid, but also said that there was no chance that Tillerson saw the shooting since he was standing outside in the parking lot when the shooting occurred. According to the affidavit signed on March 18, 2016, the day after the shooting, Tillerson and the victim's mother called him and asked him to identify Phipps as the person who shot Victor. He refused to do so since he didn't see the shooter. Prosecutors didn't tell Phipps' defense lawyers about Price, even though it was their legal obligation to do so. While Price never testified during the trial, and his name does not appear in case documents, detectives continuously tried to pressure him into testifying against Mac. At the time, Price was arrested for unrelated probation violation. While behind bars, St. Tammany detectives tried to force him to sign a pre-typed affidavit implicating Phipps. They came to the jail and tried to get me to sign an affidavit that was typed up. I remember the affidavit saying something like, "I, Jerry Price, witnessed the murder by Mac." I told the detectives that I was not signing that typed up affidavit. Price recalls that the same detectives returned 2 days later and again pressed him to say he saw Phipps shoot his cousin. When he once again refused to do so, this time detectives charged him with obstruction to the first-degree murder. They continued to persuade him to implicate Phipps for the next 2 months while he was housed in the St. Tammany Parish Jail. After 3 months of pressuring him, on his final meeting with the detectives, the charges against him were dropped. Prosecution also didn't fail to remind the jury that initially, Mac lied to them by telling that he didn't have a gun at first, but later confessing to it, shaping him not only as an assassin, but also as a liar, whose word should be taken with a grain of salt. Only God knows how, but the prosecution managed to fool the jury, and despite having no evidence whatsoever, they won the case, and Mac was found guilty of a murder. While this could get anyone's blood boiling, seeing this type of injustice, I didn't mention the most shocking detail of the whole trial. Just 2 weeks after the shooting, Mac's father overheard a strange comment from a friend of the family, Thomas Williams, who was helping with security that night at the club, and was also engaged to Mac's aunt and had 2 kids with her. Phipps Sr. said, "We were going to proceed to leave, and he was basically telling me, well, I'm the one who should be leaving." Confused by his statement, he responded with, "What you need to leave for?" To which Williams responded, "He should have been more careful." At first he was confused by what just happened, and suddenly it clicked that he just confessed to shooting the kid, and that indeed he was the one who fired the bullet that night that killed Baron Victor. They agreed to meet at a gas station, and Phipps Sr. told Williams that he needs to turn himself in, as the son was awaiting trial for something he didn't do. Thomas agreed and said that he was going to turn himself in, but once he left the gas station, he disappeared. Thankfully, a few days later, his conscience took over and he finally turned himself in. In a videotaped statement, he said that Baron was charging at him with a broken bottle, causing him to panic and shoot in self-defense. "I reached on a fire because I was nervous. I didn't know what else to do. I was protecting myself." He also confirmed that Mac wasn't performing at that time and was about to leave the club when all of this happened. After he fired the shot, he dropped the gun on the floor and left the scene by jumping into Daryl's truck. The most mind-blowing fact was that even though he confessed to shooting the kid, St. Tammany police never charged him for the killing or searched his place for the murder weapon. They claim that his story doesn't line up with the events that took place that night, and as mentioned, they never found the gun at the scene. I want to remind you that he confessed to all of it in 2 weeks' time after the shooting happened, meaning that when they were doing the things that they were doing during the trial, they not only knew that they had no evidence, but they also knew that the real killer was out loose. Years later, the DA who worked on that case, Walter Reed, was found guilty on 18 fraud and corruption-related charges and was sentenced to 4 years in prison. To say that misjustice was served that night is an understatement. During the sentencing, McKinley Phipps Jr., a black man from New Orleans, whom his own life was chasing the dream of becoming a superstar, reaching people to the love of music, was sentenced to 30 years in prison on September 21st, 2001 for a murder that he didn't commit. After 7,670 days, or 21 years in jail, Mac was released from prison on June 22, 2021. While he regained his freedom, he lost one thing to injustice money could never buy: time.